it's mostly a good day. But at that point in Pride, they just started doing a big balloon release. And so they'd have a big balloon release of, I'll say 30,000 balloons. And each balloon represented someone who died of AIDS. And that was a moment for me where it's like a real intimation of death. Because I can remember thinking, next year, one of those balloons is going to be me.
Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. Not through lectures or statistics, but by doing what I do best. Interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. Real voices, lived experiences, no bullshit. These conversations matter, and if you think so too, please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. You can reach me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. Right then, let's get started. Now today, I'm speaking with Tony Bird. Tony is a graphic designer who moved to London in 1990. His life took a dramatic turn in 1995 when he was diagnosed with an AIDS-defining illness, a diagnosis that came incredibly rapidly, just 4 or 5 months after infection that led to hospitalisation with PCP. Tony's body reacted to the virus in an unusual way, which drew significant attention from medical consultants at the time. He experienced the seismic shift that combination therapy brought in the mid-90s, witnessing his own health transformation. Tony, welcome to HIV The Morning After.
Hi, Dan.
Now, your story is one of incredible speed in terms of diagnosis and illness, and then a remarkable turnaround. So let's start back in the early 1990s. Can you tell us about the onset of illness?
I had what was a pretty classic seroconversion illness of I had 2 weeks off work with what felt like a really bad dose of the flu. And honestly, that's kind of what I thought it was, really. That would have been back in July 95. And things just kind of got progressively worse. I started to feel iller and iller. I lost a huge amount of weight. I'd been along to my GP and she just said, "Oh, you've got a cough. It's nothing. You've got a cough." About a week before, I'd been in hospital. I'm going to say they were checking out my back because I'd had a bit of a bad back at that point. That was completely unrelated to HIV. And he talked about other things. And when I said what all my symptoms were, he said, "Yeah, I'm not the person to do this, but I think maybe you should have an HIV test. Would you be okay with that?" And, going to a back clinic and ending up with an HIV test, but yeah. And I think the following day, the cough was so bad. I was working in Soho at the time and just walking from Soho to Oxford Circus tube. I started coughing and just had to stop and sit down on the pavement because the coughing was so bad. And
which has to be said is like a 7-minute walk, a 7-minute easy stroll.
Yeah. And that was my last day at work. And then 3 days later, I'm lying in bed. I think we talked about going to ER, and I literally didn't have the strength to put my boots on and walk downstairs. And we had our next door neighbour was a GP who was also gay, and my partner just said, "Right, I'm getting Julian from next door in," and Julian just looked at my chest, sounded it, looked at me, and then called an ambulance immediately. The Princess Diana Panorama interview was literally on the TV as I was being looked over by the ambulance staff.
So that was 20th of November, 1995.
Yeah. By the time I was admitted to hospital, I'd gone down to 7.5 stone, which, I'm 5'10", so I was just really incredibly thin.
And was there a point where you think you were in denial about what was wrong? Because you talked about, you thought it just was the flu, but was there a moment where you thought, shit?
I don't think there was, actually. I mean, I think I was in denial, obviously. But there wasn't really a moment when I felt there was something else.
What does that feel like? Being in an ambulance, being looked up, being looked over, having a sense that something very serious is happening.
I think I was just mainly feeling relief that finally someone was taking this seriously. I know some people really hate being in hospital, but I think because of from that time, whenever I'm in hospital now, I kind of feel looked after and safe. I'm in hospital. I'm in ER, basically. I'm free. I'm kind of grateful to be in hospital because I've been fighting for a few days to say, look, something is seriously wrong. Can someone do something about this? And the doctors basically said, we think you've got PCP. Are you aware of the implications of that? I read things like "And the Band Played On," so I knew exactly what pneumocystis, I'll probably pronounce it wrong, but pneumocystis carniae pneumonia. I knew exactly what that was, that it was an AIDS-defining illness. And so they didn't actually mention HIV. They just said, we think you've got PCP. Are you aware of the implications of that? And I knew exactly what the implications were. If I'm honest, I just kind of felt relief that, right, now I know why I've been so ill for the last few months.
And also, frankly, you must have had relief that you didn't have to say the full name of PCP every single time. So you're in hospital, you're very, very ill, but you're feeling listened to at the very least. What is your time like in hospital? What happens there?
So I spent a month in hospital, literally just over 4 weeks. So I'm in intensive care because I'm obviously seriously ill, wired up to everything. And they start pumping Septrin into me, which is, so it's something, I think it's something they use before antibiotics, but it's got a really wide range. It's pretty strong and it's got a really wide range of what it acts on. And I started feeling better almost immediately. I remember after 2 days of it, it's like, I finally got an appetite. I want to eat food. I'm not forcing myself to eat food. I want to eat food. And that just felt incredible after several weeks of really having no appetite whatsoever.
So from the perspective of somebody newly diagnosed, what is the treatment landscape like? Because you had had over a decade now of people dying and sort of treatments limping and getting better and maybe getting better. How did you feel your prognosis was? Did you feel confident that medication was going to keep you alive indefinitely, or was it a matter of just bailing out a sinking ship?
No, I had no confidence in the medication that was available because it's only from one set of drugs which target HIV at one point in its reproduction cycle. It means that you develop resistance to them pretty quickly. So I had no sense that medication was going to keep me alive.
And how old were you, Tony?
28.
So a young pup.
Yeah, no, I can remember there was one bleak night quite early on in the hospital when my partner came to visit and I said, I'm not going to live until I'm 30. And I was probably being a little bit overdramatic, and I felt I was being a little bit overdramatic, and he used to tease me about it afterwards.
So it sounds like in 1995 you have an interesting Christmas.
Yeah, I was home by Christmas. That was good. Spent it at my partner's flat and had a couple of friends round. But I was home, and I was much better than I had been a month before.
And where was home for you?
Brixton.
From where I'm speaking.
Yes, yeah, no, Brixton Hill.
So tell me, what is 1995 Brixton like? What's 1995 London like?
Exciting, actually, for a gay man. There seemed to be a lot on.
We had pop stars.
I wasn't at pop stars. At that point in my life, I was absolutely shirts off, going to the fridge, listening to house music until 6 a.m, gay man. I moved to Brixton because of the fridge.
So for everyone listening, the fridge was in the old ABC Brixton Cinema at the bottom of Brixton Hill, at the northern end of Brixton Hill, and is now the Electric Ballroom. And was quite a famous venue, wasn't it? The Fridge Night Out.
Oh, yeah. It had a gay club in the late 80s, early 90s called Daisy Chain, which was very big, which was a weeknight. And then at about 93, they started with a gay night on the Saturday, and it was huge. It was like absolutely the place to be in London at that time.
What would a night out at the Fridge be like? Besides you taking your top off, of course.
I'd get there about midnight. Drugs would be involved.
I was about to say midnight. I'd be long in bed by then.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't drink, but there would be ecstasy. And I'd be there with friends, and, your shirts would come off immediately. There might be a PA or there might be half a dozen strippers. But, it's kind of like, I've seen what a cock looks like before. They're entertaining, but they're not while you're there. You're there to dance until 6 a.m. with your tribe. And that's what it felt like. It felt like we were one big tribe, because lots of people were taking ecstasy at that point. And you just felt you were one big gang.
And so we're in Christmas 1995. Did you feel your relationship with the queer scene in London altered as a result of you now knowing you were you were part of a brand new tribe? You were one of the HIV positive.
I don't think so, because, like I said, I had friends who were HIV positive and were HIV activists, and sometimes I'd be going out partying with them. So, no, I don't think it did really.
Now, a lot of the guests I've had on here in previous episodes to yours have spoken about a sense of shame, secrecy, isolation, wanting to shut themselves off from the world. It's very interesting that your story really does not feel like that at all.
I really didn't feel like that, because, like I said, I had friends who were HIV already. Because of the nature of my diagnosis, it was pretty public. All my friends knew I was HIV positive.
When you talk about the nature of your diagnosis, what do you mean?
Well, I was in hospital for a month. And I'd gone down to 7.5 stone. It was pretty obvious what was wrong with me.
Yeah, and that would be the natural 1 + 1 is 2, isn't it? When a gay man in his late 20s is hospitalised.
Yeah.
That's what we all thought.
Yeah. And actually, the only people I kept it, so everyone knew, but I didn't tell my family. And I find it hard to believe they didn't know now, but it was a very different time back then. There was one point about a week into my illness, in a week into the hospitalisation, where my father came to visit. He saw me, saw how rough I was looking, and was demanding of the nurses at the time, what is wrong with him? You've got to tell me what is wrong with him. I'm his father. And because I put my partner down as my next of kin when I entered hospital, the nurses were just incredible, actually. They said, you're not down as his next of kin. We can't tell you.
Did he not then put pressure on you to tell him?
Yeah, well, I just said, well, it's pneumonia. And that was a sense of shame. I felt I'd let my parents down. And I didn't tell them until a year later.
Now, you talk about being a different time. How was it different from your perspective?
My parents knew I was gay. I was completely, they were okay with that. They weren't necessarily comfortable with it at that point, but they were okay with it. I knew they loved me, and still loved me. But just that, you know, those conversations were just so much more prevalent then because, you know, you look at the situation of people's attitudes to being gay in the UK in the mid-90s were, and it was pretty grim reading.
So just winding back to the Tony and Art College, you haven't come out and you haven't had gay sex yet. At some point, you do have gay sex. What was it like losing your virginity in the climate of a virus floating around the space?
I wasn't scared. I wasn't having anal sex then, so I wasn't concerned about it. When I first had gay sex, it was with my first boyfriend. Because when I finally went to art college to do my degree, I was in Scotland, in Dundee. There weren't that many out gay men about. So I was just so overjoyed to have finally found a man my age who fancied me back.
And just to point out to people, younger people listening, the age of consent for gay people was 21.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. And, you know,
whilst it was 16 for straight people.
Yeah. So not only did it criminalize me, when we started going out, he turned 19. But so not only did it criminalize me for being 21, it criminalized him as well. Just completely ridiculous.
So moving back to 1995, in our pre-interview notes, you say that your body went from seroconversion to being very, very ill very quickly.
Yeah.
And a lot of previous guests have spoken about this being a much longer time.
Right.
Now, without wanting to have a kind of who's the patient zero narrative and blame shaming, it sounds like you are aware of the moment then that you likely became positive.
I'm pretty certain, yes. But they're not somewhat, I don't even know their name. So, you know, but I've got a reasonably good guess as to when it happened. Yeah.
I think understandably, or maybe not understandably, often people feel a need to know who it is so they can blame someone. You know, the whole culture of the patient zero.
You know, I've got no idea if they knew they were positive or not. Yeah, I feel no blame towards them whatsoever. It's, I knew what I was doing and I did it. And
did you get ill again? Because you're not far from combination therapy coming down the line, are you?
Yeah. So basically, my immune system collapsed completely. So when I was admitted to hospital, I'm not sure if they did a viral load when I was in hospital. They did one shortly afterwards. My viral load was way up in the 2 million, 3 million mark. My CD4 count was less than 10, too small to be measured.
So just to step in there, your viral load means the amount of HIV in your blood, which was a very high amount.
That's
and
huge
your
amount,
CD4 count is the level of white blood cells protecting you, of which there was very few.
Like none, basically. And that didn't change. So although I put on weight again and was feeling a bit better, those blood results didn't change for the next year.
And we talk about the next year and we go to Pride in the summer of 96.
Yeah.
What did you witness there and what did you think?
We went to the party in the park afterwards, which was
Clapham Common.
Clapham Common, yeah. And yeah, it's mostly a good day, but at that point in Pride, they just started doing a big balloon release. And so they'd have a big balloon release of, I'll say 30,000 balloons, and each balloon represented someone who died of AIDS. There'd always be a group of dizzy queens who wouldn't realise what it was and would cheer. So that was always a bit unpleasant. And so I like the people I'd gone with the park with a couple of HIV activist friends and my partner. And we just decided, we knew when the balloon release was, and we just found ourselves a little, quiet area of the park. And, oh, sorry, let me get a grip of myself. And that was a moment for me where it's like a real intimation of death. Because I can remember thinking, next year, sorry. I can remember thinking next year, one of those balloons is going to be me.
And you're a 29-year-old thinking this?
Yeah, yeah. There are a couple of opportunity infections that I got. The main lasting one, which still affects me now, is that I got shingles twice. And I got it on the side of my face, and it was quite bad, and shingles affects your nerves. And what it did do was it got into my eye and affected my optic nerve. And the damage it did to my left eye means that I'm still blind in my left eye now. It's funny because I can say it feels pretty awful, but I can't really express more than that. Because I think so much of this time, I've just kind of blanked my memory of it.
And then, when did you first hear about combination therapy? Because we'd all been hoping for a miracle, hadn't we?
Yeah.
And we were promised that AZT was a miracle. It turned out not to be. People who carried on dying, they carried on getting ill. So we had been waiting for something.
There was that was 96. There was a big AIDS conference that summer, which is when the results were presented. And I think people were just astounded by just how successful the trial had been. So I'd probably have read about that in the gay press shortly afterwards.
And had you waited and waited and waited? Were you kind of waiting for the phone to ring from your clinician?
No, because, you'd seen the results, but it was I'm not quite sure if I believed them. So I'd have been quietly hopeful, but I think people were still aware of the disappointments of the past. And, it's the hope that kills you sometimes. I'd been on various HIV meds that year. So again, I'd been on AZT, but it was being given in much smaller doses than it had done when it affected people really badly. And they tried me on DDI, and I think after 2 doses, my projectile vomiting was, I could have done that as an Olympic sport. It was, and the distance it covered, it was pretty dreadful. I had to come off it immediately.
So your bloods are still low, your immune system's still fucked, and you go on this combination therapy. What happens?
Disappointingly, the first combination didn't work. So there were really, I was on it for a month or two. It wasn't having any effect on my bloods. And that was disappointing. And then they swapped the treatment around, and they did something which was quite new at the time, quite unusual. And so they put me on 4 drugs, 2 of which were protease inhibitors rather than 1 of which being a protease inhibitor. So they tried me on 2 protease inhibitors at the same time. And I can remember, I'll say a month later, I can remember my clinician, my consultant, literally skipping down the corridor with the results because she was so pleased.
I'm imagining this would have been spring 97, according to the research notes.
That would have been it, yeah.
And we're 9 months after you saw those balloons go up in Pride.
Yeah. And I guess, again, I'm not wanting to get I'm pleased, obviously I'm pleased, but I'm not wanting to get my hopes up too high.
And do you think that's a reluctance that you still feel now?
Oh,
or was
no.
there a point at which the therapy just worked and you thought, actually, do you know what? This can now become more background noise.
Yeah. I think within a couple of years, maybe even just a year of starting taking it, the results for everyone pretty much everyone, obviously, there were some exceptions, were so good that, and actually at that point, there was even talk that if they could keep the viral load, the amount of virus in your bloodstream, at levels that were so low they couldn't find them for several years, there was even talk it might be a cure. And obviously that didn't pan out. That's fine. But so, the results were so good that after a few years, I was certain that at least my condition would be managed. And new drugs had started to pop up as well. So not just the first of the combination drugs, newer, slightly better drugs were popping up. And so it felt like they'll keep finding new drugs. So even if I become resistant to some, there'll be other options available. And within a couple of years, I was feeling pretty confident. I'd say those early HIV drugs, yes, they absolutely worked. And they saved my life. But some of the side effects were still pretty grim sometimes.
Like what?
Oh, God, diarrhea. It's... I could present myself as having a life that was pretty normal. But, there were a lot of times when I was going out with a wad of toilet paper stuffed down my knickers and a spare pair of knickers in my bag. Because you never know when diarrhea might strike.
And how does something like that affect you?
You just get on with it. It's, I was determined to carry on and live my life. I wasn't going to stop doing things. But I tried to carry on as normal as best I could.
Still taking your shirt off down at the fridge?
I was actually, yeah, absolutely damn right. One of the side effects of the drugs was that they affected the way fat accumulated in your bloodstream and the way your body distributed fat.
So are we on combination therapy now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was impossible for me to put on any subcutaneous fat. And so my doctors just said, you can't put on weight by fat. The only way you can put on weight is by going to the gym. And so I started going to the gym, which I'd always kind of been a bit opposed to. And, I was absolutely not a muscle Mary. But when you've got 0% body fat and you start going to the gym, I got pretty decent abs. I might not have had big arms or a big chest, but I had really good abs. I was absolutely going out and showing those off.
I was about to say, I imagine you were quite a popular gentleman.
I did okay. I wasn't... I did okay.
In fact, talking about sex, what is sex like in terms of, if there are conditions that are either demonized in heterosexual society or even within our own queer society, and we talked about this on the podcast, people still not understanding now, especially younger people on Grindr and Scruff and things like that. What is your sex? You're in combination therapy now. What is your sex life like?
I think by the time dating websites when like Gaydar came along in the early noughties, I guess, 2000, early noughties, I quickly realised, because I said I'm completely out about my status, I quickly realised that I could put my HIV status up on my profile and other HIV positive men would see that and contact me. And so, which basically meant I could have lots of unprotected sex because we were both HIV positive.
And why, from a enjoyment and from an emotional point of view, why is unprotected sex a thing? Because I grew up with having to wear 15 condoms on my dick. And always having that checkpoint of association of sex with illness. So why for you is unprotected sex, and why was unprotected sex important?
I guess I hadn't really had very much of it at all before I was infected. To some extent, there's a feeling that you're doing something that society frowns upon. And so there's element of being a little bit rebellious. And just to be honest, it just felt nicer.
Feels closer, doesn't it? Feels more intimate.
Yeah, it's, it's feeling the touch of another person, basically.
Now, in your research notes, you talked about having varied experiences with HIV services over the years. Some were good, some were bad. Tell me about that.
I guess, well, if I'm on it, if we're naming names, I'm talking about the Terence Higgins Trust. So in the mid-90s, the HIV activist friends I was friends with were pretty pissed off with the trust. And eventually they set up the UK coalition for people with HIV and AIDS.
Can you just tell us who Terence Higgins Trust are, for people who don't know?
So they're an HIV organisation, absolutely the most famous one, probably the first one set up in the UK. There was feeling that they weren't really servicing the needs of people with HIV, and that there was a need for an organisation which was run purely by people who had HIV themselves.
I remember there being conversations around this time that the very well-intentioned services of THT were very much focused on prevention rather than providing advocacy for people who were positive. I don't know how fair that is, but that is the conversation I remember being had around this time.
That's my recollection as well, yes.
The reason I think a lot of this is controversial is, as with a lot of charities, often the government would employ a charitable organization to provide certain services on their behalf because they were experts in that field. And so therefore, if some of these services are missing, it is problematic.
Yeah. So the THC were really good. Were really good with me when I'd had benefits stopped for one reason. I had to appeal, and they absolutely held my hand through all that process in a way that I couldn't, they helped me in a way I couldn't have helped myself. They were brilliant. But then later on, at the end of the noughties, when a lot of benefits were taken away from HIV positive people, I absolutely felt that the THT were complicit with the government in doing that. And then they refused to help people who'd had their benefits taken away. And it was just like, what the fuck are you here for?
So why would they be complicit?
Because they'd been involved in the government consultation. And I don't know what they were arguing. I wasn't in the room, but they were involved in the government consultation. And then when the government, which was a Labour government at the time, at the end of Gordon Brown's prime ministership, I think, when the benefits were taken away, the THT didn't put any information about it on their website. They didn't talk about it. At least 6 months went by before the THT did anything at all. And it just kind of felt like they were being absolutely complicit in that.
And what would you have liked them to do?
For them to put information out there and for them to help people appeal, try and win their benefits back on appeal. And I went to them at the time. They took all my details down and then said, no, sorry, we can't help you.
And so what were your activist friends doing on the back of this?
So the UK Coalition of People with HIV and AIDS, usually called it the UK Coalition, was an organisation that was set up by people with HIV, for people with HIV. They were running help for various things, but one of the biggest things they did was they set up a magazine called Positive Nation, which was an A4 glossy magazine that just dealt with news, interviews with people with HIV. I can't really call it a lifestyle magazine, but it was kind of aping those things.
And as it should have done, because we still had at that time these classic visions, didn't we, of the gaunt, of the Kaposi sarcoma, of these really hackneyed old school visions of people who are HIV positive. And I think there did need to be a reboot.
Yeah. I mean, just presenting, it talked to HIV people about their lives. And I mean, even as someone who had friends with HIV, just to see that bigger, broader range of people was fantastic. If you were living somewhere where, or if if you hadn't told anyone about your status and you had no other friends with HIV, then it would have been an absolute lifeline.
So life settles down for you. You
Yeah.
find out what your options are. You've got better representation in Positive Nation magazine. You've got combination therapy that works. And do we pretty much wind forward to 2025 with life ticking over?
I guess, yeah.
You've had quite an up and down couple of decades. You seroconvert and then quite quickly you're hospitalised. You do a bit of AZT, you do some drugs. They're not particularly nice. Even combination therapy initially wasn't fantastic to you. And then you face something quite shocking in your life. And that's ballroom dancing. What happened there?
I'd been scathing about it when I was younger. Actually, if there's one, I don't have regrets in my life, but if there is one regret I have, it's that I didn't go to a dance class when I was in my 20s. Because I went to my first dance class when I was, I guess, 44, 45. I'd reached my early 40s. I really loved clubbing. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't going out to pick up. I was going out because I wanted to dance. And by the time I'd reached early 40s, it would come to midnight and I'd be thinking, shall I go out or shall I go to bed? And I was going to bed. But I still missed it. And then I had a friend who was really into it. And I'd been to his wedding and I'd seen him dance with his partner at his wedding, and then their friends were dancing together. And that looked, it's like, wow, that looks good. And I watched Strictly, and you watch the contestants on Strictly, and they look like they're having the time of their lives. And so I just expressed it to my friend one New Year's Eve at a party and said, I'm thinking about coming ballroom dancing just to see what it's like. And that was it.
Where's that done? Is that in that amazing old hall?
Yeah, well, it's at Bishopsgate Institute now.
Oh, okay. Bishopsgate is amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So much love for that place. But at that point, it was in a little underground nightclub in Holborn. And I went and enjoyed it, and everyone is so welcoming to newcomers there. They all know what it's like not turning up to a dance class, not being able to dance a step, and they make newcomers feel so welcome and they're so friendly. It's the most time I felt community in my life.
And did you take your top off?
People tend not to take their top off.
So we're in 2025 now. What does this look like now for you? What is Tony's life like?
It's pretty much normal for a gay man in his late 50s, I think. It has very little effect on my life now. I take my meds once a day. The side effects for the meds, they kind of stopped about 15 years ago for me. So I take my meds once a day. I go and see my consultant twice a year. And that's pretty much it.
So taking you back to Tony in that ambulance, and Panorama's playing in the background, and Diana's saying, there was 3 of us in this marriage. Did you ever imagine that you would be alive in 2025 saying out loud, yep, I'm on these meds, HIV is pretty much not really part of my life anymore?
When I had the shingles and I was losing my eyesight, I probably couldn't have imagined that. A couple of years later, I probably could have done, actually. Yeah.
So then, Tony, you didn't die.
No.
And you're not dead now.
It's so long ago now, and everything was so different. It just feels like a different lifetime, really.
So what's your future like, do you think? What do you see ahead of you?
Oh, God, a lot more dancing. Just a pretty normal future. And honestly, it's I'm happier now than I have been at any point in my life.
Well, you got to live in a part of society when the Golden Girls was commissioned and broadcast. And frankly, that's quite a happy time for all of us.
And as a gay teen, essential.
I know, God bless Channel 4. So then, chances are this digital file is going to outlast both of us, because I'm also a gay man in his 50s. So considering this will outlive us both, what would your postcard to the world be, Tony? Your message to the world that you want to float out there into the wilderness?
I kind of have two, which one would be a sort of slightly generic HIV one, which is that, HIV has changed. These days with HIV, if you're on HIV meds successfully, then you can't even pass the virus on during sex, even without a condom. The other one would just be a more generic one, which I think that as you get older, I think it's really important to keep an open heart and an open mind. And that's the best way for staying young.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of HIV The Morning After. My sincere thanks to you, Tony Bird, for coming on here and speaking about your experiences. And your very different experiences. It's lovely. No one has the same story. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, suggest a guest, or share your own thoughts, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.